All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the lab. Hope you guys have been enjoying the interviews that we've had the last 2 weeks. Tonight, I wanted to bring, Brandon and Alex back in here with me. The topic of tonight is speed training, but in particular, the pelvic mechanics. So, like, we always want to talk about, efficiency and the movement patterns that we're utilizing. We talked about speed training a while back. If I were to bring like Brandon and one of the gentlemen from Saginaw State Saginaw Valley State University together, what would the terminology be? Well, that kind of sparked me want to think about why not just talk about posture with running. In particular, with posture with running, though, what I wanted to discuss is the anterior pelvic tilt. So Brandon is going to give us a very good lowdown. No pressure here, Brandon, about why the anterior pelvic tilt is so detrimental to sprinting mechanics. All right. So Brandon, in your professional opinion, why is this such a bad thing to have?
So if we talk about just like a top end speed aspect, if you got the anterior tilt with the pelvis, it's going to kind of just automatically have you a forward lean to you. Your hips are going to be obviously in the anterior tilt. It's going to cause a lot of knee joint bending first. So obviously your knee joint bends before your hip. You're going to have a huge butt kick. Heel peak height is going to be way backside. The more backside mechanics you have, the less front side mechanics you're going to have. So we want to work on that knee and hip joint being synchronized. So if you have a posterior tilt, which is the position you want to be, you're actually going to get 20% more, anywhere from 15 to 20% more power output per stride. With that, your stride leg is going to increase, and you're not going to have that strain on your hip flexor. You're not going to have that huge butt kick. So, talking about levers. So if you have a huge butt kick, your foot's going to flare up. The ground's coming. There's not going to be enough time for your foot to go way up here, swing underneath your hip, get front side mechanics, and then go back with the ground. So basically, your heel's going to go peak height behind your butt, and essentially you just do a nosedive straight to the ground. And I'd say 80% of the time, if you have a huge anterior tilt, you're going to have an overstride. Some of them guys, I mean, if you got like some stupid elasticity guys that seem like, I mean, you're talking like 40-inch verts type thing, you'll see them guys they'll run in the sub tens, low 10, sub tens that just have that freak natural spring, and they kind of have a butt kick anterior tilt, and they're kind of the guys that you kind of question, like, okay, does hip position really matter?
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, well, that dude's also got the every natural ability you can think of in his advantage.
Mhm.
So for the majority of the population, you're going to just have that huge overstride. You're going to lead to hamstring injuries, your hip flexors, your power output's going to be decreased, ground contact's going to be off. I can keep rambling, but I feel like I hit them all.
So let's clarify a few points here then, just so I can kind of make sense of it a little bit more. So when you're saying when people have to move more into a posterior pelvic tilt, do you mean more of a neutral range, like kind of a deal?
Neutral to upright. Like I used to like to have my kids like literally grab their pelvis and I'll have them arch their back, and then they'll feel their pelvis drop, and then I'll have them kind of flex their low abs and squeeze their glutes, and they'll get a feel for that pelvis starting to rotate up. And the hardest part you'll see, and especially like the junior high school level, is your pelvis position isn't never going to change. So
Hmm.
whether you're coming out of your dry phase, going into your second and third gears, what I call before you stand up into your top end speed, a lot of kids will have a hard time making that transition. They'll kind of keep their pelvis in that position and just kind of like lift their chest, which is going to drop their pelvis into that anterior tilt. And that's why a lot of kids have a hard time transitioning to top end speed.
Okay.
So yeah, anywhere from that neutral to that good solid posterior tilt.
Okay. So not necessarily like, going too far into the posterior tilt, but more like that neutral, nice neutral range, more upright posture.
We'll train in that position, like we'll do speed drills in that position. But when they start getting into max velocity, that position to a neutral position kind of is that middle ground. Depends on like your core strength, your hip flexor strength,
Hmm.
things like that.
Okay. So if you see someone who has that, let's say they're like they're starting like maybe under more fatigue, like it's more sustained in the sprint. So like let's say your difference between like your 100-meter versus your 400-meter sprinter. Let's say they don't start off in an anterior tilt, but then they're getting around like maybe those last 150 meters, and then they start entering into that. Um, how are you going to go about like cueing them, or what would you like start implementing into their program to kind of help with that long term, or like the sustained sprinting time?
Kind of depends where they start to fatigue.
Hmm.
If I got a guy that's fatiguing at 100, 200, dude's just if in a 400, for instance, if he's already losing form at 100, 200, he's just not conditioned enough for it. You got a guy kind of getting out there to the three. 300 to 350 range. I mean, that's just kind of that gut checkpoint time where you kind of start adding, the 450s, the 500s, and then I wouldn't go really past the 600 to
Okay.
try to kind of to in a sense you're getting into a little bit of a muscle endurance
That makes
too.
sense.
So I mean, you're not going to be able to maintain a high. Obviously, your ATP PCR system's already gone, but you're kind of getting into that threshold of the glycolytic system's kind of starting to transition over. So I
Okay.
mean, how much power output can you sustain in a super fatigue state at that level of power output to try to sustain it for that long? I mean,
Okay.
you're trying to maintain or you're trying to finish a fatigued race that you're hitting, depending on what level you're at. If you're at a high school, you're around 50 to female, male, anywhere from 50 to a minute 10. So you are starting to switch the energy systems. So you got to kind of take that into effect. If you're an elite college athlete, you're really starting to just switch into that glycolytic system.
Okay. How have you gone about like if you have someone who has difficulty with like maintaining the neutral position of the pelvis, how have you gone about like identifying maybe it's more of like a mobility versus a stability issue? Like what are like some key characteristics to like look out for?
A lot of kids at that age, mobility isn't an issue in their hips. It's
Hmm.
kind of more their ankles. You can see that in squats. A lot of kids just don't train their hip flexors properly.
Hmm.
So we can establish. I mean, we got that monkey foot. You can find out real quick if a kid's got weak hip flexors, whether it's an ISO hold, whether it's reps, whether it's starting in a lunge position, knee on the ground. Maybe put your foot on a 6-inch box and then just try to. Can you pick your foot up 2 or 3 inches and hold it there? And a lot of kids can't do that because they just have weak hip flexors.
Okay. So then with like the triple extension, when when you're kind of taking a look at that and you see them kind of driving through, what would be like an acceptable amount of anterior tilt? Like what's like you've gone
There's
beyond
there's really no.
none
It's
at
either
all.
neutral or up. Yeah.
Okay. That's why I was curious if there was like any like leeway into that at all.
You start. I mean, it kind of depends on the sport. It's still not really necessarily an anterior tilt, but you start getting into like football, like running backs, for instance, where they're almost running in a squatted position. I mean, you're bouncing from hole to hole, maybe. So you got jump cuts in there where you don't ever really truly get the full extension until you get to the open field.
Hmm.
So you are kind of in that squat position where there is a slight anterior tilt in the pelvis, just because that's in the natural squat position. Unless you have like this awkwardly butt wink style squat when you're not going to have that when you run.
At
So if you
least
kind of break down some slow foot, like it's just Barkley, Shaquan Barkley. If you kind of hit whenever he's bouncing from hole to hole, he'll never get extension in his hip or his knee until he hits that gap, and then he explodes, and then you'll see it. So there's different sport situations where you're not going to have the perfect triple extension. I don't even really care so much about knee extension, honestly. As long as you're getting to a good hip drive, there's a little bit of knee joint bend still, and you're starting to switch into that next year. That's perfectly fine. You look at the elite track athletes;
hmm
they're hardly ever getting full extension in the knee. Getting their hip through, there'll be a little bit of a bend in the knee, maybe like a 160, 170 degree, and then I mean it's all about just extend the hip and get to the glute, which you can start getting into even more depth. So you talk about like Ben Johnson, for instance, a guy that's got like 600-pound squats. You'll actually see him start to ice skate out of the blocks just because I mean the glutes an angular muscle. So they're going to do whatever they can to produce as much power. So you'll actually see their feet going sideways so they can tap into that extra power output before they start going into different gears. But the pelvis itself, not really so much. It's always going to be into that neutral posterior tilt. Like I said, unless you're kind of in that squatted run, like a running back or basketball player dribbling in between traffic kind of thing.
Hmm. Okay. Trotter, any questions you have for the Wonder Kid over there?
Nope. I ask him shit like this every day.
Anything maybe in particular I haven't hit on yet that maybe you just recently asked?
Oh, what's the like proper shin angle of like the block start? Like where are you looking at
Okay.
that? So then he's
Um,
saying,
Ideally, like if you look at like a block, like a track block start, ideally the shin angle is going to be your projectile angle. A lot of kids think this because they're like blocks are like perfectly like straight up and down. They're going to get like this huge horizontal push, but they're going to have their block this way. You're not going to be able to. I mean, if you have your block this way, your shin angle is damn near going to be touching the ground. There's no high schooler is going to be able to handle that. So you want your shin angle, your block, and your foot and shin to match your projectile angle because the body's full of levers. So if you got your block this high, you're going to have your shin, like a freaking 85, 80-degree angle. And then there's two options. You're either going to have this huge shin drop to get to a 45 projectile angle. That's going to take a long time. Or you're just going to stand straight up out of the blocks because you're got so much weight over your hands, you're going to fall on your face. You're going to have huge overstrides to counteract it. So ideally, you want your shin angles, both shin angles, to be your projectile angle.
Okay.
The least amount of knee bend or shin drop into an extension is the best.
Okay. So if you have someone who has like, I know I think we talked about this maybe a month or two ago. It's like starting block position, right? Lower back and pelvic positioning. What would be like optimal coming out of the block? Like, do you want them in a rounded position? Do you want them in a flat back, especially if they have a tendency to lose into that ankle?
Ideally, you want them in a flat back just because if you put a ball at the top of their hip, you want it to just roll right off their head, chin tucked in their chest, and if they can handle if they can get into a good, let's just use the triplets, from the shoulder to the hip to the knee to the ankle, if they can get to that straight line with their chin tucked, their chest, they should be able to watch their toe come off the block. A lot of kids have a hard time separating their upper back from their neck. So when they tuck their chin, they round their back, and then all of a sudden their chest is down, and then their pelvis is out of position, and then they have to overstride to counteract the forces to not fall on their face before they can kind of get their feet up underneath them again. So we just do a lot of muscle memory drills where you're just coming out of like bands. So like you can still put a lot of power output to it. The band's going to kind of slow your movement down, then you get a feel for separating your neck and your upper back separation. Yeah. It's been a long day.
I can tell, man. No, I appreciate this right now. So I guess if you have someone who's consistently faulting or like moving into the anterior pelvic tilt when they're doing their sprints, what would be some areas that are going to be prone to maybe injury or maybe like chronic irritation long term with sprints?
Hip flexors and hamstrings will be the biggest, just because when you come a lot of backslide mechanics, your foot's going to flare up. That's going to put a lot of strain on your hip flexor.
Mm-hmm.
And when your foot comes hammering straight down, you're going to have ground's coming. If your foot's way up here and the ground's coming, you got to extend quick. And that's just going to put a big jolt right through the hamstring. So that's going to put a lot of stress on there, unnecessary stress, where ideally if that foot and the hip and knee joint bend at the same time, that foot's going to come right up underneath your butt at peak height. And then you're just basically going to deactivate your hamstring, let it unfold, and then you're going to pull it through underneath your hip through your ground contact, slightly underneath your center, a little bit out in front of your center of mass if you're talking about a top end speed. When you're accelerating, there's no pull. It's all just straight push. And when you start kind of getting out in front of you, the top end speed where that foot does unfold out in front of the center of mass, then you got to kind of use that hamstring and glute to extend it back underneath your hip going into that next stride. So, I mean, obviously there's a chance for injury everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to produce power at the max velocity. So there's a chance, but if you just kind of just hammer those accessories and stuff like that in the weight room, proper rest, proper hydration, proper all those kind of things, kind of limit the chance of that happening. And then a lot of people don't think about their groins when they sprint. A pretty common injury is groin. So it's like you got to train that. That's part of a hip flexor. You do have to use those muscles to lift your leg. They do take an impact upon ground contact. And then most common one is shin splints, and a lot of it is just because you go from sitting on the couch right to a crap ton of volume. And the amount of kids that do like tempo runs in their spikes is unbelievable. The only time you're doing spikes is at max effort sprints, not tempos, not long 100 repeat hundreds, just straight races and like maybe flies, acceleration work. That's it.
Okay. So if you have someone who is like let's say struggling on the curves, like what would that be more of an issue then? Like
I'm probably just not learning how to properly do a arc run. So like actually you're gonna have your outside, if you're talking about baseball, you're talking about track, you want to
Mhm.
maintain an inside lean. So you're actually gonna have your right arm across your body to help maintain inside leverage. If you have both arms going straight up and down, that outside arm is going to help carry your momentum forward and not shifting to the inside. And then it's all pretty like we actually do arc running as a sense of ankle, knee, and hip strength to
Mhm.
be able to put your. I'll actually have my kids at school do angular um, calf raises just so they can train that joint in different angles, like to mimic an arc run or a cut. So I mean, it is pretty strenuous on the body, but a lot of people just don't have that inside leverage.
Okay.
Is what's most common.
Shoot. Trotter, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What would you say are like the top three things you learned from Brandon about speed training over the last year? Maybe, let's see how good of a teacher he is.
Oh man, like the top three to me.
Yeah, to you. What's like really stuck out as like some like let's play some gym
Um,
pearls.
I would say like I forget like the actual phrase, but you can't teach speed. Um, like he pretty much just concludes that that's like a myth because he just says you just got to teach positioning, and then you are maxing that human's potential out on speed, like that kind of thing.
Okay. I
Same
like
thing with like it's like lifting weights, man. It's all leverage. You got to put your body into certain positions.
Yep. Yep. And then oh man, another one is the importance of how high you actually have to pick your knee up as well, especially in like a high knee recovery run and stuff like that. Because I know like I send him videos like of me running now because that's apparently what I'm doing. And yeah. And he's like, yeah, dude, your knees are like 8 inches, like gotta go up higher. And I'm just like, I don't think that's gonna happen, especially at this speed. And then he just tells me to back it on back down.
nice.
Yeah. So then I quit and pout. Uh, ankle mobility and the importance of like us training the hip flexors directly versus through more compound like movements.
Mhm.
So we definitely isolate those and we isolate those quite frequently, especially with the new programming that should be coming out hopefully this summer.
New programming.
So, well, we've been analyzing the past 6 months from the last program on how it was affecting our athletes, if there was an injury uptick, um, and where, kind of thing. So, yeah, so it's just reanalyzing and re-putting out and try to correct the bugs that we had.
I love that. That's good to hear.
No, my
Absolutely.
bad. Took the spotlight off Brandon. Back to you.
Oh, very nice. Brandon, is there anything like if there's anything in particular, let's say like high school sprinters, like what would you say would be like the number one thing you probably fix with the younger kids compared to with the kids who have been or like the seasoned runners who've been doing it more or longer?
A lot of it's just joint synchronization. Just timing up the knee and the hip together. I mean, like I said, like if those two aren't working together, along with your pelvis positioning, it's just going to be not a good combination. Like you'll have those guys that you look at them at a track and their form is all over the place, but they're fast. They're just everything synchronized. So they got like half their body is synchronized with the other half of their body because opposite arm, opposite leg type thing. If you
Mhm.
break it down frame by frame, if their one hand's doing this and then their opposite leg's doing the same exact thing, and then it's hands swiping their pocket and their ground contacts on the same time, and it's chaos, fluid chaos in a
Yeah.
sense.
Controlled chaos.
Yeah, I mean that's so there are special cases where that is a thing, but a lot of it's just hip positioning and then syncing up those two joints. And then if you don't got the power output to put in the ground, it's hard to be fast. And this is like a lot of our cross country kids are kind of figuring that out to where it's not about the miles you run. You're at the end of the day, the goal is to get to A to B at the fastest time. That's who's going to win the race. So you got to have the like lactate threshold to be able to do that. You got to be able to to have the overall speed to do that. A lot of people they get used to running these 10 miles and their race is 2 miles. So they're used to this pace, and all of a sudden the pace increases. They hit that lactate threshold way early in the race. If you're a mile runner, usually by lap 3, like you're feeling it. And then that lap 4 is where you start having your time drop. So it's just a lot.
Damn. Damn, man. No, I'm not
But
gonna.
I will say, to piggyback off of that one, there has been, I feel like, a pretty good uptick of our distance runners, like buying into that and understanding like the lactic buildup and all that. And now like we're training into that and for time and doing all of that as well. So, and they're seeing great progress. Like the one kid hit like over a 30-second PR in his mile.
Like we've always had that like crazy good sprinters, but like our distance runners are starting to like top order sprinters are doing.
Yeah. Like he's under 5 minutes now. And it's consistent. Like it wasn't like a fluke. He did it again.
Wow, that's insane, actually.
Yeah.
We got kids going sub 420s. We got kids going sub 920s in 2 miles. National qualifiers and steeplechases. I mean, distance runners are doing well right now.
Damn, that's pretty sick. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Damn. Did we miss any little points here on the importance of the pelvic position with sprinting?
About hammered it.
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed tonight's episode. Please, 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 I highly encourage you guys to go over to the Instagram page, drop us a follow, please. It really does help us. I mean, we really enjoy doing this. I mean, I love sitting, basically being able to talk with all the different interviews, being able to sit down with Brandon, Alex, and Dave, and being able to do this. So if you guys wouldn't mind, just please support the page, hit that follow button, and make sure you guys share one of your favorite things, either on one of the latest posts coming out, or follow it on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. All right. Thanks, guys.